All right, so in this one, we're going to be working on comment replies. That is, allowing any of our users to reply on any given comment. Now, this same sort of concept you could use to have a long threaded reply. That is, replies to replies. But all we're going to do here is a reply to one comment thread, or the initial comment thread. So basically, it's going to have one comment and then a set of replies, right? It's not going to have one comment and then a set of replies, and then each reply has a set of replies, and then so on. You could really stack it really far, but we just want to make it nice and simple where there's one comment and one set of replies. So to do this, it's fairly straightforward. All we have to do first is go into our comment model, and we're going to make a new foreign key in here, and this is to itself. So we're going to make a foreign key to itself, and I'll call this actually parent, and it's going to be a models. Going to be equal to models.foreign key and quotes of self. I'm going to add null equals to true and blank equals to true. Of course, lowercase b. The reason that we are even putting null or blank or even this in our model itself is because we want to be able to reference it inside of an instance itself. So that means that we want to have an instance method, which is what we'll do as well, down here, and we're going to say define children. So basically we want to get all of the other replies, so the reply elements. I call it children because you call it parent and children to really understand the relationship between the two. The parent is the top level, where the children are the bottom level, or so become after it, and they kind of rely on one another in a way. So basically what I would do here is I would return comment.objects.filter, and this is going to be filtering parent equals to self. So the instance would actually be able to get that based off of this. And since we're doing that as well, we also want to do define is parent. We're just going to make a object here saying, or a property method that would allow us to basically say whether or not this particular instance is a parent, and we're going to return, or well, basically we'll say if self.parent is not none, return false, else we're going to return true. So if there is a parent inside of this, then it's not the parent, therefore it's a child, and this is just a nice little property or convenience method that we put there. Of course, you could check doing this exact same thing on the instance, but this is just a nice little shortcut to do it for us. And as far as the children's concerned, this will get us all the children that we want. And since we have this children, we also want to update our comment manager, and we'll do that in a second, but we want to update how all comments come through inside of every time we query the database for our comments. Because really, we only want to show the parent comments, and then the parent comments will be linked to all their replies, or the child comments, right? So I'm just going to make a little note here and call it replies. Okay, so now that we've got this stuff, let's and we've made some changes to the models, let's actually make one more change, and I'll say class meta, and I'll say ordering equals to, and a list, and I'll do negative timestamp. So this is going to reverse the ordering. By default, it does a positive timestamp, so that means the oldest ones are going to show up first. When I put the negative, it'll say the newest ones show up first, which you'll see in just a second. So let's go ahead and run the migrations. Python manage.py make migrations, and Python manage.py migrate, and let's run the server again. And if we come in here, now what we see is our newest comments are there, so new comment. This should be right on top, and it is. So right off the bat, also, this should not actually keep the form. The form data should clear out. And the reason it's not clearing out has to do with how we actually run our view. So we'll jump into our view, and inside of the post detail, if the form is valid after all the form is created and stuff like that, we are going to return a redirect. So we'll return HTTP response redirect, and this is going to a path of some kind, and I'll do new comment dot content object. I'll explain this in a second. Content object dot get absolute URL. Okay, so new comment. We look back in our model. New comment content object. In this case, it's going to be a post object. So the get absolute URL method is something that typically exists inside of models. So if we click on a model for post, we've already done this, but it is important to note that we did write this on our own, right? So if you were to do it on the comment model, you can do the exact same thing. In fact, we should probably do that where eventually that it would have its own thread. So you would go to get absolute URL for that particular comment. So basically all I did here was after the comment's successful, we're going to re-render the post detail page. So another new comment. And what's going to happen here is this is going to go into the database, and then that comment form will be empty. If I hit post new comment, it now says another new comment. Cool. All right, so now we've got all of the bulk stuff done as far as the logic is concerned with storing the data. Now what we need to do is actually update our template and our view to actually handle this new data. So inside of post detail, we want to actually update how our comment and form is rendered. So what I want to do is actually have the form underneath the comment. So inside of this same block quote, I want to have the replies as well as a new form actually rendered inside of here. The exact same form, but a new form nevertheless. So the first thing I'll do is copy this form here, and I'm going to put it inside of that block quote. And we're going to save that, and we'll refresh in here. And now what we see is each comment itself has now a reply option. So we're just going to change the value of the submit button to reply. Right, so it now allows us to write this reply, but we have to add another thing into this form. We have to add the parent ID, or the ID of the comment that we're going to be associating these two. Right, so like each comment has its own ID, and then each comment, if it needs to be a reply, we need to set a parent for it. So again, this will make more sense once we actually do it. So let's actually go ahead and do it. And underneath this comment form, I'm going to do input type equals to hidden. I want this to be a hidden element. I'll give a name of parent underscore ID, and I'll give a value equaling to, it's going to equal to the parent comment. So the parent comment is this comment right here. So we'll come in here and do comment.id. And there we go. So that is the parent comment. That's the reply that we're sending it to. So this form right here is making a child comment. It's making a reply for us. So let's go ahead and save that, and let's just try it out for a second. I'll say another new comment and a reply to, and we're going to copy this another new comment, hit reply, and what happened? It said a reply to another new comment. It didn't actually write that reply. But if we look into our inspect element here, into the form itself, what we'll see in the code is we'll see the parent ID in here right there. So hidden input parent ID value equals to 6. If we go to the next one and inspect that element, we're going to see parent ID value equals to 5. So that's right. That's working correctly. So what we need to do now is reference that parent ID inside of our view. So we've got this form is valid method. So this is saying all of the other stuff in the form is valid. So we can actually set the comment. We actually can make a new comment here. But what we will want to do is also set the parent, right? So we need to actually set the parent for the comment model. So we need to set this field itself if that parent ID exists. So inside of this form invalid, I'll do parent ID equals to request.post.get, and now parent ID. So you might be wondering, why are we using request.post instead of form.cleanData? Well, we didn't actually add the parent ID inside of this comment form because setting that parent ID for each comment gets a little tricky if we are trying to do it all in the view, right? So we only set that comment form one time with the initial data one time. We can't, if we went through and set every single comment and a new individual comment form for each comment, you're starting to get like a lot of repetitive data that just doesn't need to be there. So what we're doing here is actually getting that parent ID. Now, I do still want to have some safeguards against this to make sure that this parent ID actually exists in my database. So I'm going to put a try block here, and I'm going to, instead of just getting the requested post data, I'm going to make sure it's an integer by just doing int. And if it's not an integer, it's going to run a value error. So we can just put an exception here and just say parent ID equals to none. So this is, again, saying it's like if it's not an integer that's coming through here, if some other kind of code for some reason came through as a parent ID, then we're just going to ignore it. And we want to do one more step is we want to make sure that this parent ID even exists. So first of all, we'll say if the parent ID is there. So basically, if it's not none, then we are going to get a parent query set. And this is just checking if the parent ID actually exists. So we'll do comment.objects.filter, and we'll do parent, and it's going to be underscore ID equals to parent underscore ID. Now, these are double underscores here. So this is checking to see if the parent query set actually exists, right? It's actually checking this specifically. Actually, we don't need parent ID. We just need this specific comment. So this is getting to make sure that that parent query set exists. So this parent is actually in the database. So if parent query set dot exists, then parent object equals to parent query set dot first. We'll go line by line and explain this stuff again in just a second. So now that we've got this parent object, we can actually set this to the parent here. So we'll do parent equals to parent object. And notice, since we don't have the parent object anywhere else, we need to also set this up here as none. So it's going to be none all the way through unless all this other stuff is true. So down here, this can be none. We can set it in as none, and that's okay. Okay, so let's go back line by line what's going on here. First of all, we declare a parent object as none. We just make sure that it's in there. Then we parse the data, to the form data that's being submitted, to make sure that we have a parent ID. If we have a parent ID, we run a query set filter to see if that parent ID even is in the database by running if it exists. And if it does exist, then we'll get that parent object being the first item in that query set. Now, more than likely, if it is an ID, there's only going to be one of them. So this will only have a length of 1. So in all seriousness, you could also say and parent query set.count equals to 1, right? Those are two checks that we'll just double check to make sure that this is not messing up somehow too. And then we put the parent object, we get that first item in there by doing this, by calling that method. This method could also be, you could also do this, but this will probably not run a value error because we have the count check here. But when you're using query sets in Django, you might as well just use first. And then finally, we still create the comment like we did before, but this time we just set the parent object itself. Okay, so hopefully all of that stuff makes sense and hopefully it works. So let's go ahead and try it out. And we're going to come in here and I'll say now a new reply and hit reply. And we've got the new reply showing up still, so that's not exactly what we want to see. But let's go ahead and look in the database and see comments. And we've got a new reply, and it is giving us a parent here. If we go back to the other comment, it does not have one. All the other ones will not have one. So now we just have to fix on how it's actually being rendered by going back into our models and defining or overriding the all method or the all filter for query sets. And we'll just say query set equals a super comment manager self, and we'll do dot filter parent equals to none. And then we'll return that query set. And we refresh in here. What we should see is this actually showing only the ones that do not have a parent. So let's go ahead and restart the server here a second. We might have to double check to make sure that that's actually coming through. And it's not coming through correctly because it's filtering. If you remember filter by instance, it's doing this stuff. So we also want to filter one more thing. And we'll say parent equals to none. And finally, we refresh. And there we go. So now it's no longer there. It's no longer showing that comment. So we just updated how our query set works on both filter by instance as well as all. So now that we've got that, we can do one more method, or actually implement this children method inside of our post detail. So inside of here, right above this comment form, I'm going to just basically copy this. Go ahead and enter this down a little bit. I'm going to copy this block quote stuff, paste the new one in here, close off the block quote. Okay, and we're going to bring that back. And now I'm going to run a new for loop, so for child comment in comment.children. Close off that block quote in for. And now using the child comment for each one of these, we now will have these comments coming through At least they should. So we refresh in here, and now we see this reply. And all of that is starting to look a lot better. Notice if it doesn't have a reply, it's not going to show one. But once it does, it will. So respond to new data. And we hit reply. And again, if I scroll down, it now is showing me these responses. So this is pretty cool. This is allowing us to do all sorts of things with our child comments now and having all of these comments. Now, one of the things you might note off the bat is we are repeating some data in here. But the reason I am going to keep repeating the data has to do with how this form works, is because if we didn't repeat this data, then the form might not fit in the block quote like so, which I think this actually looks pretty nice. It's going to look even nicer, especially when we add some additional animation function, so not the comments don't and the reply doesn't always just show up there. So if you have any questions on what we did here, let us know. I know we covered a lot here, but hopefully it is starting to sink in on how all of this stuff works. And of course, if it doesn't, let us know. Otherwise, let's keep going.